Welcome to the Quotive Corner, a place where we pause for a few minutes. Whether you're starting the day, ending it, or just stepping away from the noise for a moment, to reflect on a single idea worth thinking about. Sometimes it's a line that inspires us. Sometimes it's one that challenges how we see people or the world around us. Either way, the goal is simple. One quote, one reflection, and maybe one new way of thinking about something that usually passes by unnoticed. Today's quote comes from the Irish playwright and wit Oscar Wilde, and it appears in his 1892 play, Lady Windermere's Fan. Every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future. It's a remarkably compact sentence, but it quietly dismantles one of the most common habits we have as human beings, the habit of placing people into fixed moral categories. We tend to divide the world into the good and the bad, the admirable and the shameful, the righteous and the corrupt. It's a comfortable way to think because it simplifies things. If someone is a saint, we assume they've always been noble. If someone is a sinner, we assume they've always been flawed. But Wilde reminds us that human beings don't work that way. A saint, if we look closely enough, almost always has a history of mistakes, moments of selfishness, poor judgment, perhaps even serious wrongdoing. The difference is not that they were always virtuous. The difference is that somewhere along the way, they changed. In other words, sainthood, at least in the metaphorical sense Wilde is using it, is not the absence of failure. It's the result of growth. And the second half of the quote may be even more powerful. Every sinner has a future. That line challenges the opposite mistake we make when judging people. When someone fails or behaves badly, or makes a serious error in judgment, we have a tendency to freeze them in that moment. We define them by their worst action. We say things like, "That's just who they are." But Wilde suggests that this too is a misunderstanding of human nature. People are not static. They evolve, they mature, they learn, sometimes painfully, from their mistakes. A sinner, in Wilde's formulation, is not someone whose story has ended badly. A sinner is simply someone whose story is still unfolding. There's also an interesting historical irony behind this quote. Wilde himself was a brilliant writer and social figure in Victorian England, admired for his wit, intelligence, and literary talent. But later in life, after a series of personal scandals and a highly publicized trial, he was imprisoned and disgraced by the society that once celebrated him. In many ways, Wilde experienced firsthand the phenomenon he was describing. Society elevated him to the status of a cultural saint, and later condemned him as a moral sinner. Yet history has been kinder to him than his contemporaries were. Today he's remembered primarily for his insight into human nature and the brilliance of his writing. That alone is a reminder that the categories of saint and sinner often say as much about the moment in time as they do about the person. There's another layer to this quote as well, one that touches on humility. When we admire someone deeply, it's tempting to imagine that they were always exceptional, that their character was somehow pure from the beginning. But recognizing that every saint has a past reminds us that greatness is usually the result of struggle, self-correction, and persistence. It is rarely the product of perfection. Likewise, remembering that every sinner has a future encourages a certain patience with human beings, including ourselves. Everyone has moments they regret, decisions they wish they could undo, words they wish they hadn't said. The idea that a person can grow beyond those moments is not just hopeful. It's necessary if we want to live in a society that believes in improvement rather than permanent condemnation. In fact, many of the qualities we admire most in people, wisdom, empathy, restraint, are often the result of lessons learned the hard way. A saint may have a past because they learned something from it. A sinner may have a future because they still have time to learn. And that perspective can change how we look at the people around us. The person we admire today may have struggled quietly before becoming who they are now, and the person we're tempted to dismiss today may be only one decision, one realization, or one opportunity away from becoming someone very different tomorrow. Which means that when we judge people too quickly, we're often judging them in the middle of their story. And that's rarely the best place to draw conclusions. So Wilde's line ends up being less about saints and sinners and more about time. Time reveals the past behind the saint, and time also creates the possibility that the sinner's story isn't finished yet. And maybe that's the quiet wisdom behind the quote. Human beings are not static labels. They are evolving stories. Some chapters are admirable. Some chapters are regrettable. But very few stories are as simple as we'd like them to be. Thanks for spending a few minutes here at the Quotive Corner. If this reflection gave you something new to think about, whether about yourself or someone else, then the quote has already done its work. Because as we always say here, wisdom isn't in the quote, it's in the reflection. I'll see you next time.